Welcome to this episode of Way, Truth and Life, a Fountain of Light series where His Grace Bishop Emilianos of Maloa answers spiritual questions from across the globe.
This is Bishop Emilianos. You're watching Way, Truth and Life. I will read the question and the response, and then we will say a few comments on it. I had a question from your book on humility. It was about the section on hypersensitivity in today's generation. What kind of hardships can we allow to strengthen our children's resilience? And the response was, to begin with, I don't think we need to create hardships to toughen up our children. When there is love, respect, and understanding in the family, their spiritual and psychological roots can grow wide and deep so that no wind can make them drop to the ground. If there is lack of love, acknowledgement, and discernment growing up, they will develop partially and with deficiencies. They will look for love elsewhere. They will seek to be understood elsewhere. They will find comfort, acceptance, and acknowledgement elsewhere, and not necessarily at all the right places. They might also develop hypersensitivity as a cry for help, as a defense mechanism, to attract attention due to a psychological survival reflex or reaction. The mistake might be ours as parents. They need to feel secure, physically and psychologically, so that they won't have to put their guard up and use their ego to feel safe or somehow protected. And then the person asked a second question based on what I just told them. On my side of the family, we're naturally very sensitive to the point of being oversensitive. It's hard to separate the origins, whether it is genetic or learned behavior. I suspect a bit of both. I see it in myself and in my kids too. It's a hard generational pattern to break. Do you have any advice to teach the kids not to take everything personally? Do I understand correctly from your response that it's not pushing them to be tougher, but encourage love and respect will help them mature more fully? And then my second response. Correct, and I understand. If they see their parents encouraging them and have a positive approach to life and to others around them, they learn to do so too, and they won't be afraid of life. To grow a strong tree from a seedling, you don't get it through tough times. You get it through optimal conditions. They need the reassurance that the tough times will not happen from within the family. They will be external. This gives them the confidence to turn to their parents during their difficulties, and they will naturally develop as they should. Developing naturally and not being afraid of life, the developed sense of security in life gives our children the peaceful background and the clarity not to panic on any potential hardships, not to consider everything as a personal attack, meaning not to take things personally. Such an upbringing eliminates insecurities. Our parents' love and understanding, the emotionally secure and stable upbringing of our children eliminates their insecurities, and believe it or not, it also eliminates the pathological environmental inflammation of their ego. So what I meant by that is that there are two ways of learning, the optimal way and the hard way. Usually people learn the hard way. And that's why sometimes we think that if we have difficulties in our lives, that's what will make us stronger. The reality of things is that God will make us stronger, not the difficulties in life. And I will give you the example of Christ. Christ has to always be our example, right? So, Christ was born as human, although he was God. So he was God and he became human, but he was not human in one small detail, which is not small, but he was not human in the sense that he did not receive upon himself the original sin. He was fully human, but he did not receive upon himself the original sin, and he came on earth as a human to save us, to free us from the original sin. But to do so, he was not under the curse of the original sin. What was the original sin? It was what Adam and Eve did in paradise. They disobeyed, and then they didn't take upon themselves the responsibility. If they were just to disobey, that's fine, but then they blamed God. So Eve said it was a snake, and Adam said it was Eve who made me fall, and you gave me Eve. So basically they blamed God for what they did. Now, they had to learn the hard way. So they were sent out to exile, they were locked out of paradise, and what happened was that Christ had to become human to save us from what we did to ourselves. In our lives, we do not need to learn the hard way. What do I mean by that? There were saints that they could understand the human nature, they could understand the human sins, they could understand the problems people go through, not because they went through these problems themselves, because they became one with God. And through God's eyes, they could see us, they could see the depths of us, they could see everything inside us. This is the proper way. This is the optimal way of bringing up a seedling, of bringing up something which will grow to a huge tree. And this is the way that God wants us to grow. But because we are human, we create problems for the people around us. So these problems, they end up being, at the end of the day, knowledge for us because we learn from them. But this is not how God wanted things to happen. This is how we make things happen ourselves. So hardships are not necessary to learn. They are necessary because we make them necessary. The way to learn is by being one with God and by seeing things through God's eyes. Let's make this clear. And this is why we say that when you have a seedling, you give the optimal conditions possible to help it grow. You don't put it in the freezer. You don't make it freeze to learn how to be cold resistant. You don't. You don't put it in the fry pan to make it be heat resistant. You don't. If people put us in a freezer and if people put us on the fry pan, we might survive with God's grace and we might learn and we might have more knowledge afterwards because of God's grace, but this is not the way to learn. This is the way people do things, not the way God does things. This is what God allows, but this is not how God teaches us what we need to learn. Let's say a hypothetical example. So let's say that my dad was very strict in an unhealthy way. Let's say that he used to hit me, and let's say that he used to verbally abuse me, and let's say that sometimes I had to leave the house and go and live with my auntie only because I needed to survive. If he was to hit me, I was a little kid, I was afraid, I left the house. So in this way, I got used to being away of my environment, of my house. Growing up, let's say that I had to separate myself from my family for a little bit because I had to survive, I have to make it. And let's say that this scenario repeated itself recently, hypothetically. So I had to leave my environment, the place that I loved, because I was kicked out. And let's say that a cousin called and told me, when you were little, you had to leave the house to survive, and the story repeated itself. I would say, hypothetically, that yes, I was trained. Hardships give us experience, but if we don't have faith in God, we can't go through them. We might have the experience, we might know how it feels to be homeless, but if we don't have faith in God, even if the story repeats itself, there will be a point that we won't make it. So what I'm saying is that you might get the experience through life, but the strength to keep going is given from God. And this strength could have been given from God only because you have a relationship with Him. You didn't need the experience. You didn't need to be kicked out as a child. You didn't need to be kicked out as an adult. You didn't need all this. These are things that people create to us and they make us toughen up. But we don't need all this to toughen up. We need God to give us the strength. And then, even if you don't have the previous experience, you can still make it. And this is what it is. However, in a family, you need to have a set of rules. For example, you won't accept ever one of your kids to bully one of his or her siblings. That's not acceptable. That's not something you would allow. There need to be a set of rules. They need to respect each other. And this starts from the parents. The parents need to respect each other, and there shouldn't be any fights in front of the kids, because the kids, they get hurt, and then eventually they might develop issues. So a set of rules need to be set, and we need to teach our children how to share. We often see that families with more kids, these kids, they are more social. They know how to share with others. When, if it is only one child in the family, there might be an issue because if we're not careful, we treat them like a king or a queen. And then growing up, we spoil them and they think that they own everything. We need to be careful there. That's the parents' responsibility to teach the kids how to share, how to respect others, to teach the kids that they are equal with others and they're not above others. If we don't do this, our seedling, our little child, won't grow in a healthy environment. So this is very important as well. Another thing the kids need to learn is not to judge their siblings or anybody, and the parents need to be non-judgmental for the kids to get this message. And the kids, they need to admit their mistakes. For this to happen, they can't be afraid to death. There need to be a set of rules, but the kids, they can't be afraid to death. Too much fear will make them hide their responsibilities, hide what they did wrong in order to avoid their responsibilities, which will end up in a punishment they're afraid of. They can't be afraid to death. Children have to grow up in a loving environment, in an environment that they will know that even if they were to accidentally hurt someone, they will be understanding. There will be fairness, but also understanding. They can't be afraid. If they're afraid, if they do something, they will never come to us and tell us, look, I've done that, could you please forgive me? So we need to teach them how to say, I'm sorry, and we need to be the example of that. And we also need to teach them how to say thank you. They need to be appreciative of everything we do for them, and we should also show appreciation and say verbally thank you when they do something nice for us. And this is how we teach them, with our example. One more thing. We shouldn't push our children to always be perfect and to show a perfect picture to their environment. We can't expect them to always be first in everything. At school, at other activities like sports, painting, music, we can't expect them to be first in everything. They need to realize that it's okay to be second and it's okay to be 33rd. It doesn't matter. What matters is to be true to yourself, to be honest, and to know that if you work hard, there will be good results. But if you don't, well, it's okay, but it's your choice and it's not the best. However, if we create for them the insecurity that if they are not first, they are a failure, it's not healthy, it's not good for them. They will be embarrassed to tell us that they are not perfect, and it will be either perfect or nothing. And this is not how life works, because not everybody can be always first. And if we make this mistake, it will show up later on in our children's life.
Thanks for tuning in to Way, Truth and Life. If you have a question you'd like to ask His Grace, simply head to the link in bio on the Fountain of Light Facebook page.